Hey there, welcome to Shadow Archives. Before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you enjoy true horror and unsettling stories. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, in places where the forest stretched so far that you could walk for hours without ever reaching a fence or a road. My family always preferred houses that had big pieces of land, open fields, and long stretches of woods. It was normal for us. Those forests were part of my childhood, the same way playgrounds and city parks are for other kids. My friends and I spent nearly every free moment running through them. We climbed trees so tall that the branches swayed under us, followed old deer paths until we were too tired to walk, and wandered without thinking about time. The trees felt endless, and the quiet of the woods always held a strange kind of comfort that made us feel free. But as peaceful as the forest felt, it also had a darker side. Adults in the area liked to say that the woods were safe, but we knew better. Anyone who grew up playing deep in those trees had at least one story about a strange man, or someone watching from far off, or footsteps that didn't match your own. Run-ins with creepy old men happened more often than people want to believe. Most of the time, you could tell they were just drifters or people camping illegally. But this one experience has stayed with me, because even now, after all these years, I still can't decide whether the man I saw that day was truly a person or something else entirely. Near one of the houses where I lived as a kid, there was an old abandoned home that everyone in the neighborhood called the Witch's House. The name wasn't creative, but it fit. It looked like something out of an old ghost story. The windows were broken, the roof sagged like it was tired of standing, and the wooden boards had been eaten away by rain and time. Even in daylight, it felt wrong. You could stand across the field and look at it, and something in your stomach would twist. My friends and I never went close to it. No one had to tell us to stay away. The place felt like it didn't want anyone near it. Between my family's property and the witch's house was a wall of blackberry bushes. Not the small kind you find in parks, but huge, tangled thorns that grew taller than we were. They formed such a thick barrier that no one would want to climb through them. Even if we wanted to explore the abandoned place, the brambles made sure we didn't. One afternoon, my friend and I were farther up the edge of the woods and discovered a treehouse that neither of us had ever seen before. It wasn't new, but it wasn't falling apart like the witch's house either. It stood just behind what would have been the backyard of the abandoned property. We climbed up the ladder to look around. The boards creaked under us, but the view was nice. Through the spaces between the leaves, we could see the back of the witch's house below. While we were exploring the treehouse, we both noticed something moving near the back door of the abandoned home. It wasn't a big movement, just a shadow or the hint of someone passing quickly, but it was enough to scare the both of us. Our hearts jumped, and without needing to say anything, we climbed down and left the area quickly. We tried to forget about it, but the image stuck with us. A week or so later, we were playing deeper in the woods on my family's land. This time, we were north of the witch's house, farther away from any of the old buildings. We did what we always did. We climbed trees. Each of us picked our own and spent time trying to find sturdy branches to sit on. We weren't very high up, but we were just high enough that someone walking by wouldn't easily notice us. While we were talking and laughing quietly between the branches, we heard something, the sound of branches snapping. It wasn't a small sound like a squirrel or a deer. It was heavy, deliberate. My friend and I froze instantly. We didn't say a word. We held our breath. The forest around us became silent except for those slow, steady footsteps. Then an old man stepped into view. He came from the direction of the witch's house, walking toward the area where we were hiding in the trees. He wore a worn-out cowboy hat that looked like it had survived countless winters. His flannel shirt was faded from years of sun, and his jeans looked old and dusty. Everything about him seemed aged, like he had been living alone in the woods for far too long. He stopped near where we were perched and slowly looked up at us. "Hello, girls," he said. My whole body went cold. My first thought was, how did he see us? We were convinced we were hidden well enough that no adult would spot us unless they were standing right under our trees. The man didn't seem startled or confused. He looked like he already knew we were there, like he had been watching us before he stepped into view. I knew better than to speak to strangers, especially men who appeared out of nowhere in the deep woods. My mind raced, trying to understand why he was coming from the direction of the witch's house. Nobody lived there. Nobody should have been near it. The place had been abandoned for years. My friend, who was older and braver than I was, spoke first. She greeted him back, though her voice shook slightly. The old man didn't smile. He didn't look threatening, but he didn't look friendly either. He seemed tired. His expression was strange, unreadable, like there was something weighing heavily on him. "I want you two to be careful in these woods," he said. "I've been around a long time, and I would not want you both getting hurt." The way he said it made my stomach twist. It didn't feel like a normal warning. It felt like he knew something we didn't, something dangerous. Then, without waiting for us to respond, he turned around and walked away. He went back the way he had come, heading directly toward the witch's house. He disappeared between the trees without looking back. My friend and I were so terrified we couldn't move. We stayed in those trees for several minutes, listening for any sign of him returning. When we were absolutely sure he was gone, we jumped down and ran straight home. Neither of us looked behind us. We didn't stop until we reached my house. For the next few weeks, we couldn't stop thinking about him. We kept trying to make sense of the encounter. Who was he? Why was he there? How did he see us so easily? And why was he walking from a place everyone believed was empty? We started watching the witch's house from a safe distance. Every afternoon, we would go to the edge of my family's property with binoculars. We watched the windows, the yard, the roof, the trees around it, everything. We were waiting to see lights or movement. Anything that would prove someone was living there, but nothing ever happened. The house stayed dark. The windows stayed empty. We never saw another person come or go. No smoke, no flashlights, no signs of activity. It was completely still, like it always had been. That made everything worse. If someone was actually living there, we should have seen something. But if no one was living there, then who was that man? As kids, we tried to convince ourselves that he was just an old man passing through. Maybe he was a neighbor. Maybe he had been hiking. Maybe he used the backwoods as a shortcut. But none of those explanations made sense. No one ever walked through those woods except kids. Adults stayed on the roads or on the trails closer to town. And no one, not a single adult, would willingly walk through the wild blackberry thickets that stood between the witch's house and the rest of the land. The only path from that direction was the one that came directly from the abandoned backyard. Sometimes at night, I would replay his warning in my head. The way he spoke felt like he was telling us more than what his words said, as if the woods held dangers we were too young to recognize, as if he wasn't warning us about animals or getting lost, but something else entirely. And then there was the biggest question. How did he see us in the trees when we could barely see him? The forest wasn't bright that day. The trees cast a lot of shadows. We weren't moving or talking, yet his eyes went right to us. As the years passed and I got older, I still thought about him. The memory never faded. I talked to adults about it later, trying to find anyone who might know who he was, but no one recognized the description. Older neighbors said the witch's house had been empty long before I was born. My parents said no one had lived in that direction for decades. Some people even said the last owner had passed away under strange circumstances and the place had been untouched since. That only deepened the mystery. To this day, I do not know if the old man was a real person, a memory of someone long gone, or something else entirely that walked those woods. But after that encounter, my friend and I never wandered too far from home again. Whenever the forest felt too quiet or too strange, we turned back without hesitation. And every single time I hesitated on a trail or felt like I had gone too far, I remembered the old man, his tired voice, and the warning he left us with. Whatever he was, I still believe he meant it. If you want me to rewrite more stories like this, or expand it even longer, just send the next one. I was a young punk rock kid in 1982, living in a way that only makes sense when you're young enough to believe you're invincible. Back then, I was squatting in a rundown house far out in the country, miles away from the small town I lived in. When I say far, I mean 12 to 15 miles out from anything resembling civilization in that decade. The house felt like the end of the world. Trees surrounded it, the road was small and winding, and the creek beside it looked like it hadn't seen a proper human visitor in years. The house itself had a strange history. It was originally a place called Camp Lynen, used as a summer camp for troubled or orphaned children from Philadelphia. They used to bus kids from the city all the way out there to the middle of nowhere and let them stay the summer. The location wasn't an accident. They wanted a place remote enough that you couldn't wander off or find your way back to town, a place where no neighbors would complain and no family members would drop by unannounced. Even as a young adult, I could feel that the house had absorbed something heavy from the lives that passed through it. I was working in a band at night and doing art during the day, just to scrape by. My girlfriend lived there with me, and another guy named Cubby stayed in one of the lofts. Cubby was a junkie and had that drifting, half-present energy of someone who had spent too long living in forgotten corners of life. He kept to himself most of the time, only coming down when he needed food or when the silence of the house got too loud for him. The house barely worked by normal standards. Out of all the rooms, only 2 outlets still had electricity. We learned quickly how to survive with almost nothing. We cooked food on camp stoves, used candles when the sun went down, and lived by the rhythm of nature whether we liked it or not. I still don't know how the wiring managed to give us even those 2 outlets. I joked that I was shocked they existed, but the truth was the house felt far too old to still be alive at all. It stood in the middle of nowhere with no neighbors close by. The nearest farm was a few miles away. Behind the house rose a steep hill covered in thick woods, so vertical and tangled you would practically need a rope to climb it. In front was a long, rutted dirt driveway that circled in a horseshoe shape. The road itself ran along a small creek, an estuary of the Brandywine. Everything about the location felt forgotten on purpose, as if whoever built it wanted to disappear from everyone else. One afternoon, I decided to ride my bicycle into town to visit my mom. I didn't own a car then, and my bike was my lifeline to food, work, and the world outside those woods. When it was time for me to leave, my mother insisted on giving me a ride back. She didn't like the idea of me biking through the dark back roads at night, and I never said no to extra time with her. Even with my messy lifestyle back then, I always appreciated moments with my mom. Happy for the ride, I loaded my bike into the back of her car, and we drove out toward the old house. But the driveway was too torn up for her car to handle. Deep ruts cut through the dirt, the kind that only a truck or a 4-wheel drive could navigate, so she parked as far down the driveway as her car could safely go. We stood there at the bottom of the slope talking about normal things moms and kids talk about, how I was doing, how she was doing, and her gently reminding me that I knew where home was if I ever needed help. We had been talking for around 10 minutes when something caught my eye. At the top of the driveway near the back door of the house, I saw a toddler walking around. Not a blur, not a shadow, an actual child. Clear as day. He looked like he was about 3 years old. He moved slowly, wandering around the gravel like he was exploring. My mother saw him too and asked who the child was. I was 22 at the time, living deep in the woods with musicians, artists, and addicts. I didn't know anyone with a child. The only person I could think of was a woman named Tanya who sometimes hung around our band. She had a kid around that age. But I didn't know her well. She always managed to show up at gigs, so maybe she had gotten a ride out and was visiting my girlfriend or cubby. It seemed unlikely, but in the moment it was the only explanation I could come up with. So I told my mom that Tanya must be visiting someone at the house. We kept talking while casually watching the child walk around. The whole thing seemed strange, but not frightening then, just unexpected. A 3-year-old wandering around a collapsing house in the middle of nowhere didn't feel right, but my mind kept insisting that Tanya must be nearby somewhere out of sight. Eventually it got late and I grabbed my bike from the back of the car. The toddler had wandered out of sight by then, and I walked up the driveway toward the house. When I stepped inside, I expected to hear voices, footsteps, or at least signs of someone visiting, but the house was completely silent. My girlfriend was the only person in the main room. I asked her how Tanya had left without me seeing her, and she stared at me like I was speaking another language. She said no one had been there, not all day, not all week. She asked if I was hallucinating. I explained everything, how my mom and I had watched a toddler walking around outside, how long we had seen him, how clear he was. Her face changed slowly from confusion to concern, not fear, but something deeper, like she believed me but didn't want to. She repeated that nobody had been out that way in weeks. Cubby had barely left his loft, and there was no sign of visitors. His space was exactly the way it always looked when he was alone. Clothes in piles, old blankets, no extra footprints or anything out of place. That's when the truth hit me. My mom and I had absolutely seen that child. Both of us. We had talked about him out loud, watched him walk around, and even tried to make sense of who he might be. But inside the house, nothing supported the idea that anyone else had been there. Given how isolated the house was, the idea of a child walking through the woods toward us made no sense at all. The woods behind the house were too steep and dangerous. The front was too overgrown and remote. Even an adult would struggle to find the house without knowing where it was. A child that young couldn't have gotten there on his own. The history of the house suddenly came back to me. The summers filled with troubled children, the long stretch of time where no one lived there, but the ghosts of memories. The stories the locals whispered about the place, the neglected rooms that felt heavy and strange, the kitchen that always gave me chills for no clear reason, and the barn was the worst. I never liked being near it. The air inside felt wrong, like something watched you from the rafters even when you were alone. After that day, I couldn't shake the memory of the toddler. I could remember the exact shape of his head, the way the light fell on his clothes, the tiny steps he took. And I could remember the feeling I had when I stepped inside the house afterward. A sinking, twisting feeling that something was not normal. Something didn't belong in the world the way we understood it. My grandmother used to tell me ghost stories from the old South when I was little. Back then I thought they were just fun tales meant to entertain kids. I didn't think much about whether they were true, but seeing that child changed something in me. It added a new dimension to everything she had ever said. It made all those stories feel suddenly possible. As the years passed, my memory faded in places like everyone's does with age. But that child never left my mind. Even now, at 66, I can see him as clearly as if I were standing on that driveway again. I can hear my mom asking who he was. I can feel the strange calmness of the moment right before the fear set in. and I can feel the heaviness of the house, the sense that something lingered there from a time long before we ever showed up. I still don't know what I saw. Maybe I never will, but I'll never not believe that it was a ghost. And knowing that my mom saw him too makes me even more certain that we both witnessed something real. Thank you for reading. If you made it this far, you understand why this memory still follows me after all these years. I remember almost every detail of what happened that night in the woods, even though years have passed. The memory still sends a cold shiver down my spine whenever I think about it, and sometimes I find myself replaying parts of it without meaning to. It was May of 2020, during the early months of the pandemic. Schools had shut down and everything felt strange and disconnected. I was a senior in high school, stuck in that weird transition between childhood and adulthood, but the world around me was frozen in place. Back then, I spent almost every day at my friend's house. Their neighborhood was small, a quiet little place in South Jersey. It wasn't the type of neighborhood with long rows of houses or huge families outside grilling on weekends. It was really just two streets that connected in a rectangle. A handful of houses, a few driveways, and behind it all was what felt like endless woods. Miles and miles of trees stretching into the dark. There were no houses behind it, no roads, no lights, nothing but forest. Off to the right side, a small trail branched off and led to another tiny neighborhood, but aside from that one connection, the woods went on forever. That trail was like a bridge between two worlds, the quiet human space and the part of nature that didn't care about you at all. One night around the middle of May, we were just hanging out in the garage when I noticed a skateboard leaning against the wall. I'd never really learned how to ride one properly, but something about that moment made me want to try. Maybe it was boredom from quarantine or just wanting to feel something new. So I grabbed it, and my friend and I walked to the back street of their neighborhood, right up to the edge where the trees began. There was a small hill in the road that seemed like the perfect place to practice. It was only a couple minutes away. When we got there, I noticed a narrow path between two houses, a trail that disappeared into the woods. It looked like it had been made by years of footsteps, but I had never seen it before. I asked my friend what it was, but they brushed it off. I figured I'd check it out another time, so I went back to practicing. I didn't get very far. I hit the smallest pebble that has ever existed on this planet, and the skateboard stopped while my body kept going. I landed hard, and the pain in my wrist was sharp enough that I knew immediately something wasn't right. It turned out to be fractured. Fast forward one day. The next night, when the pain was a little more manageable, I brought up the trail again. I asked my friend if they'd ever been back there. They looked at me casually and said something like, "Yeah, I go for walks back there at least twice a week." I'm not sure why, but hearing that made the idea of exploring the woods feel exciting. I thought it would be a simple little adventure, something to distract me from everything going on in the world, something to forget about the wrist and the boredom and the constant stress of those early COVID days. Looking back now, I wish we never went. We grabbed two small handheld flashlights and walked toward the entrance of the path. We didn't turn the lights on until we passed the two houses that bordered the beginning of the trail. Once the trees closed in around us, everything became darker and quieter. The first part of the walk wasn't scary. It felt peaceful, actually. The path was narrow but clear. We could see the ground enough to avoid tripping, and the sound of our footsteps mixed with the soft summer breeze. We reached the point where the path split, the small trail that led to the other neighborhood, and decided not to take it. Instead, we kept walking deeper into the woods, completely off the established path. That choice would come back to haunt us. We walked for about 5 minutes before we heard something ahead of us. It sounded like something crunching through a thick layer of fallen leaves. Heavy, intentional footsteps. Not a small animal, not a squirrel. Something bigger. We both stopped instantly. We shined our lights ahead of us, expecting to see a deer or maybe even another person. But the beam of light hit nothing, just empty branches and open space. We exchanged nervous looks but told ourselves it was probably a deer walking away too fast for us to catch it. We changed direction slightly and kept walking. 5 minutes later, the same crunching noise came again, loud enough that we both froze at the exact same moment. We pointed our flashlights ahead, and again there was nothing. No movement, no eyes reflecting back, no shape. Just emptiness. Around that same time, a light rain began to fall. Soft at first, barely noticeable. But the timing of it made the woods feel colder and heavier. That was when a feeling settled in my stomach. That kind of instinct that whispers, "You need to leave," I said quietly, trying not to panic. "We need to get out of here now." We both knew something or someone was in the woods with us, following us, watching us, maybe even circling us. But instead of turning around immediately, we realized we had gone off path twice and weren't sure exactly where the main trail was anymore. When we finally managed to find the original path again, we started walking fast. That's when the crunching noise came from behind us. Not ahead this time, behind. Louder, closer. The rain started falling harder, hitting the leaves like tiny taps on a drum. We picked up the pace from fast walking to something between a jog and a run. Something felt wrong in the pit of my stomach, wrong in a way that made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. I turned around for just a second. That second changed everything. In the darkness behind us, moving fast and almost running straight toward us, were 4 flashlights. 4 distinct beams, 4 separate sources of light. They were not slow, they were not distant, they were coming right at us. My heart dropped into my stomach. We ran. My fractured wrist was throbbing, but adrenaline drowned everything else out. It felt like all the panic in the world hit me at once. My friend and I sprinted blindly through the rain and the darkness. Somehow, in our panic, we ran right past the trail exit without realizing it. At one point, it got so bad that we considered climbing the huge wooden fence that bordered one of the houses. But there was no way I could climb it with a fractured wrist, and even if I tried, we would lose precious time. The flashlights behind us were too close, too fast. We had no choice but to turn around and run back toward the direction the lights had come from, only they were gone, just gone. No beams, no footsteps, no voices, nothing. The silence was terrifying, but for a moment, we felt relief. If they weren't behind us, maybe we had outrun them. Maybe they turned around. I stepped off the trail first and crossed onto the road, breathing hard. My friend walked casually behind me, thinking the worst part was over. But when I turned around again, just to make sure, I saw the flashlights coming back. 4 beams of light, running, silent, chasing. I yelled for my friend to run, and thankfully, they didn't hesitate this time. We sprinted faster than we ever had in our lives, running down the street, cutting around the corner of one of the houses. When I looked back again, I could see 3 or 4 figures standing near the entrance of the trail, under the faint glow of a distant streetlight. They weren't moving. They were just standing there like they were watching us leave. We ran all the way back to my friend's house, slammed the door and locked every lock on the door. Only then did we finally breathe. Only then did the immediate fear drain out of us, but the confusion didn't. To this day, we have no idea who those people were or what they wanted. We talked through every possible explanation. If they were cops, they would have announced themselves, and no police officer would be deep in the woods in the middle of the night without a vehicle nearby. There were no flashlights visible earlier when we first heard the noises, so they weren't just walking casually. If it was another group of teens from the connecting neighborhood, we would have seen them entering from the side trail. And nobody followed us into the woods originally, because the footsteps started in front of us, not behind. Whoever they were already in the woods before we entered, already watching, already waiting. They never spoke a word, not one. They chased us, stopped chasing us, then returned again, silent, fast, and purposeful. Their intentions couldn't have been good, and I still believe that if they had caught us, something bad would have happened. I've only told this story a handful of times. Most people look at you differently when you talk about things like this. They think you're exaggerating or making it up for attention. But this actually happened. It was real. And I have never gone near that trail or those woods again. Not once. Not even during daylight. Even now, I can still see those flashlights coming toward us, cutting through the dark. And I still wonder if they ever went back into those woods looking for someone else. I work full-time in healthcare, and anyone who has ever been in the field knows how draining it can be. There are days when you don't just feel tired, you feel emptied out from the inside. Some nights I come home so mentally foggy that even eating feels like too much effort. So on my days off, or after long shifts when I needed to breathe again, I would take drives to the ocean, sometimes alone, sometimes with my best friend. Those drives were like medicine for my brain. Late at night, under the stars or the pale glow of the moon, I felt like I could finally exhale. The sound of the waves, the cold, salty wind, the long talks and laughter. It all made life feel lighter, like the weight of work and stress slipped off my shoulders for a little while. But something happened a few nights ago that has made me rethink everything about those peaceful nighttime drives. I still love the ocean, but now there is a part of me that hesitates when the sky turns dark. A part of me that wonders if the peace I found at night is worth the fear that now sits in my chest whenever I think about going back. It was a cold, dark night in November. Normally I finished work at 11 p.m., but that night I didn't leave until 1 a.m. Healthcare doesn't care about your plans, your sleep, or your sanity. It demands everything. The town I worked in was small, one of those places west of the big city that people blink and miss when they drive by. I lived about 45 minutes away, and the thought of the long commute home made me sigh as I walked through the parking lot. The wind was rough that night. Brown leaves spun across the pavement, swirling around my feet like a warning the world didn't know how to say in words. I pulled my jacket tighter and hurried to my car, grateful to escape the cold. Before I left work, the coworker who came in to relieve me warned me not to take the new highway home. She said the wind was so bad that her car had almost been blown off the road. Instead, she told me to take the old highway, slower, longer, and winding through thick forests, but safer during heavy winds. Normally, taking that road added at least 15 minutes to the drive, but at 1 in the morning, time didn't matter. I just wanted to get home alive. So I listened. As I drove, my headlights cut through the dark trees crowding the old highway. The forest looked endless on both sides, like the road was slicing through a black tunnel. Every now and then, a strong gust of wind would push against my car, hard enough to make me grip the wheel tighter. I breathed slowly and tried to relax, telling myself that once I got into bed, everything would be fine. I turned on a podcast to keep myself awake. The narrator's voice was steady and calm, but the darkness around me made everything feel sharp and alert. No other cars had passed in almost 20 minutes. The old highway had no street lamps, no nearby houses, just curves, woods, and occasionally a glimpse of the coastline through gaps in the trees. The kind of road where your mind wanders but your body stays tense. About 10 minutes later, I passed through a tiny little town. Calling it a town felt generous. It had a grocery store, a drugstore, a couple of small restaurants. and a gas station that looked like it belonged in a movie about the 70s. The gas station was just a small trailer with 2 pumps outside and a flickering sign. It usually closed around 8 p.m. As I passed it, I saw something I hadn't seen for a while. A vehicle. An old truck was idling in the gravel parking lot. I saw the shape of a person sitting inside, their outline just visible from the glow of the dashboard lights. It actually comforted me a little, knowing someone else was awake at that hour. Maybe another night worker, maybe a fisherman heading out early for lobster season. Someone normal. I kept driving, but the exhaustion was slowly creeping back in. A beach was coming up in about 10 minutes, one of my favorite spots. A small place with a gravel lot and a perfect view of the waves. I told myself I'd pull over there and have a smoke. The cold air and sound of the ocean would wake me up better than any podcast. When I got there, the lot was empty. I pulled in all the way to the end, closest to the water. It was pitch black except for my headlights reflecting on the gravel. I rolled down my window and lit a cigarette. The cold air rushed in and hit my face, sharp enough to jolt me awake. I stepped out for a moment, trying to see the waves, but the wind was so strong I could barely keep my eyes open. The air tasted like salt and storm, the kind that leaves your lips numb. I shivered and quickly climbed back into the car, turning the heat up high. Finally, I felt myself relax. My shift had been horrible, and I was grateful I had a few days off. I was halfway through my smoke when headlights swept across the lot. Another vehicle pulled in and parked about 100 yards away from me. The engine idled for a moment, then shut off. The darkness swallowed everything again, except for the sound of the waves pounding the beach. Something inside me tightened, a small, uneasy twist in my stomach. Normally, this wouldn't bother me. It was common for people to stop at this beach late at night. Some would walk along the sand, others would smoke or sit and listen to the waves. Couples would come and make out in their cars. All normal things. But the feeling wouldn't go away. I checked the time, 1:40 a.m. Trying to calm myself, I lit another cigarette. The wind outside made the car creak slightly. The waves were loud, almost violent. The world was too dark, too quiet. After a few seconds, I thought I heard gravel crunch. I looked around, but saw nothing. I brushed it off as the wind or my imagination and rubbed my eyes, suddenly tired again. I reached for the brake to start the car. The moment my foot pressed the pedal, the red glow from my brake lights lit up something, just for a fraction of a second, on the side of my car. My brain barely registered it, like a shadow in motion. When I looked again, nothing was there. I laughed nervously to myself. Too many true crime podcasts, I muttered. But when I checked my side mirror to reverse, everything inside me froze. There was a man crouched against the side of my car, right near the brake light. His body pressed low as if he was trying not to be seen. He was slowly inching toward the driver's door. My blood turned to ice. I didn't think. My body reacted before my mind could. I slammed my foot on the gas, and the car jolted backward, the tires skidding on the gravel. The man jumped out of the way, stumbling. When I switched to drive, my headlights shot forward and I saw him clearly, wearing a dark sweater, jeans, and running toward the other vehicle. The other vehicle wasn't random. It was the same old truck I had passed earlier by the gas station. That realization made me sick. My stomach dropped hard as I floored it out of the parking lot and sped onto the road. Now the fear hit fully, deep, pulsing terror. I was 20 minutes from home. The old highway was one long, twisting road with barely any side streets. If he followed me, there was nowhere to hide. My eyes flicked to the rearview mirror again and again, praying to see nothing. After a few moments, headlights appeared behind me. He was following. My heart pounded so violently I could feel it in my throat. I pushed the speed higher, scanning for any turnoff, any driveway, anything. Then luck hit me for the first time. As I rounded a sharp bend, the The truck's headlights disappeared from view for a moment. I spotted a narrow gravel road on the left, one of those tiny roads only locals know about. Without thinking, I yanked the steering wheel and turned hard, barely braking. The tires slid, throwing up gravel as I shot up the narrow road. The road was so tight only a single car could fit. Trees crowded on both sides. The farther I got, the more it wound, twisting and hiding me from the highway. After a few hundred yards, I turned my lights off and rolled to a slow stop. I sat in absolute darkness, holding my breath. If he followed me, I had nowhere to go. The only sound was the wind in the trees and my own ragged breathing. My hands shook uncontrollably. I wasn't religious, but in that moment, I prayed. I prayed the headlights wouldn't appear. I prayed I would get home. I prayed this wasn't how my life would end. 10 minutes passed, then 20. No headlights. Slowly, the tightness in my chest began to ease. I stayed there another 10 minutes just to be certain. When I finally turned the car back on, I kept the lights low and slowly turned around, doing what felt like a 10-point turn on the narrow path. When I reached the main road again, I hesitated. The coastline stretched for miles and I could see nothing, no vehicles, no lights, nothing but the curve of the road against the ocean. I took a deep breath and turned left toward home. The entire drive I was rigid with fear, waiting for that old truck to reappear, but it never did. I passed 2 cars, 1 police cruiser, 1 Jeep, but nothing else. When I pulled into my driveway, shut off the engine, and locked my doors, the reality settled in. I had been less than a minute away from a man who tried to touch my car, hide beside it, and follow me in the dark. If I hadn't checked my mirror, if I hadn't reacted, if I hadn't found that gravel road, I don't know what would have happened. But I do know one thing. I will never go to that beach at night again. Some people in this world have bad intentions, and sometimes you don't realize you've crossed paths with one of them until it's almost too late. About 3 years ago, in early September, my friend and I drove up the southwest side of Mount Hood to look at the planets with her new telescope. I'll call her Agatha. Night drives and forest trips were normal for us. We often go into national forests at night, either to stargaze or to take quiet night hikes. We both know the woods very well. She has been camping her whole life, and I work as a wilderness survival guide. We've both spent long stretches of time alone or together deep in the wilderness. Between the two of us, we've had bear encounters, cougar encounters, wolves, elk, moose. If it lives in the forest, we've probably crossed paths with it at some point. I've also had my share of strange moments with people in the woods. I've stumbled into signs of occult rituals. I've come across people living in hidden camps off-grid. I've met very unusual strangers in places no one should be. All of those are their own stories. I mention all of this because neither of us scare easily. We're used to weirdness. We're used to strange noises, odd lights, sudden changes in the forest. It takes a lot to shake us. That night, Agatha wanted to try out her new telescope, somewhere high enough that there wouldn't be much light pollution, but not so high that we'd run into early snow. She suggested a dispersed campsite off a medium-use Forest Service road on the southwest side of Mount Hood. She'd been to the spot before, but it would be my first time. She described it as a wide clearing about 150 feet across, mostly dirt and gravel, bordered by thick trees. She said it was perfect for stargazing. We drove up the forest road as the sky grew darker. The air had that early fall edge to it, cold, but not fully winter yet. We talked about the planets we hoped to see, about Jupiter's moons, about how clear the sky usually is up in that area. I was curious about other spots higher up, so I asked if we could drive a little farther before committing to her usual clearing, just to see if there might be a place with an even more open view of the sky. She agreed, so we passed the spot she knew and continued up the road for another couple of minutes. As we drove, my headlamp and the truck's headlights cut through the trees. On the right-hand side, I noticed a tent sitting about 60 feet off the road at what looked like another dispersed campsite. That alone wasn't strange. People camp in those areas all the time. But there were a couple of things about this tent that made us pause. First, there was no vehicle, no car, no truck, no bike, nothing, just the tent. Second, it was colder than you'd expect someone to be using a standard 2 or 3 season cabin-style tent without any backup plan. Night temperatures at that elevation that time of year usually sit between 30 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit. That night, it was around 36. Not impossible to camp in with the right gear, but cold enough to be uncomfortable or even dangerous if you weren't prepared. I pointed the tent out to Agatha, and she slowed the truck to about 5 miles per hour so we could get a better look. I was worried that maybe someone had abandoned it or that it had been dumped there. If it was trash, we would at least take note of it and, if possible, pack it out on the way back. I took my headlamp off, dimmed it a bit so it wouldn't be too bright, and aimed it in the general direction of the tent, being careful not to shine it directly inside in case someone was sleeping. In the 10 seconds or so that we crawled past, I noticed that the tent didn't look right. It didn't seem fully zipped up, and through what looked like the open mesh of the door, I thought I could see straight through to the other side. The poles looked off somehow, too, like the tent had been put together wrong or half collapsed and then left that way. We didn't dwell on it. We said we would stop and check more closely on the way back down to see if it was abandoned, but for the moment, we kept driving up the road. Another minute or two later, the road narrowed sharply. It curved on an incline and tightened in that unpredictable way forest roads often do. We're used to sudden changes like that. Forest Service roads are known for being rough and uneven, but this time, before taking the curve, Agatha came to a complete stop. "I don't think we should go any farther," she said. I looked at her, surprised. There hadn't been any obvious obstacle in the road. No washout, no big fallen tree, nothing our truck couldn't handle. "Okay, why?" I asked. "I don't know," she said after a pause. "I just don't feel good about it. I'm turning around. Let's go back to the original spot." Her tone was calm but tight, and she sounded upset in a way I couldn't quite place. I felt a small ripple of concern, but decided not to press her. We've both been in the woods long enough to respect gut feelings even when they don't make sense. She reversed about 50 feet, found a spot wide enough to turn around, and headed back down the road toward the clearing she originally wanted to use. As we approached the area where the tent had been, I took off my headlamp and handed it to her so she could shine it out of her window toward the left side of the road. The first time we saw the tent, it had been on the right. Now, approaching from the opposite direction, it should have been on our left. The strange thing was, it no longer looked like it was in the same spot. It seemed like it had shifted 30 to 50 feet down the road. Not a huge distance, but enough that it felt off. It also seemed closer to the road than before, like it had edged inward. Agatha slowed to a stop directly across from it. As the headlights lit up the area, something about the tent made my skin crawl. But at first, I still told myself that I might just be misremembering the exact spot. People's memories are flawed, and the forest at night can play tricks on your depth perception. Then Agatha did something that changed the entire feel of the moment. She turned my headlamp on to full power and aimed the beam directly at the tent. "Hey," I said quickly, "maybe don't blast it like that. If someone's inside, you're going to blind them." I stopped mid-sentence when I really looked at what we were seeing. For a few seconds, I didn't understand what I was looking at. The tent felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. It was a cabin-style tent, but nothing was where it was supposed to be. The angles were strange. The lines didn't match. It felt like looking at a drawing of a tent by someone who didn't quite understand how tents worked, like a distorted painting. "What the hell are we looking at?" I said softly. "Is that even a tent?" "Yeah," Agatha said slowly. "I think it is. It's just upside down." That didn't make sense either. Upside down? How? The poles, the walls, the angles. It was like the whole thing was twisted. I blinked several times, wondering if the cold night air was causing my eyes to water and distort my vision. I stared at it for another few seconds, but the more I looked, the more my head hurt. It was like I was staring at a tent that had been broken and rearranged in the wrong order. The shape was familiar, but wrong. I looked away, thinking that maybe it was my eyesight. I wished I had brought my glasses. My night vision is usually decent, but for some reason I felt like I couldn't focus on the object in front of me. An uneasy feeling began to creep up my spine. I tried to ignore it. I asked Agatha if she saw anyone inside. She took a few seconds before answering. "To be honest," she said quietly, "I have no idea what I'm looking at, but yeah, I think I see someone's bare legs sticking up in the air." My heart jumped straight into my throat. The first thing that flashed through my mind was that someone might actually be in the tent and either injured, unconscious, or dying from the cold. I imagined a person lying on a cot in a dead bug position, their legs up, knees slightly bent. I peered at the tent again, looking through the mesh of what I thought was the door. For a split second, I thought I saw exactly what she was describing. Pale legs angled upward, as though someone was lying on their back with their feet pointed toward the ceiling. Then I blinked. In the moment it took for my eyelids to close and open, something changed. The mesh door looked closed. The legs were gone. The tent still looked wrong, like its proportions were off and its lines didn't match what I knew about the structure of tents. The more I tried to focus on it, the more disoriented I felt, as if my brain couldn't categorize what I was seeing. I started to get a headache. It felt like my eyes and brain were fighting with each other. Agatha kept staring at it, muttering, "What the hell?" under her breath. Then, suddenly, she straightened, rolled up her window, turned off the headlamp, and said, "Let's just go. Someone's probably sleeping in it." I don't know why she reached that conclusion. I don't know why I let myself accept it. Maybe because we were both looking for the most normal explanation in a situation that was quietly, deeply wrong. We had experienced strange things in the wilderness before, and both of us know how dangerous it can be to get spooked into bad decisions. So even though our instincts were screaming that something was off, we pushed the feeling aside, at least for the moment. We drove the remaining few minutes back down the road and pulled into the clearing she had chosen originally. We got out, put on our headlamps, and did our usual sweep of the area, checking for trash, evidence of recent campers, and any sign of wildlife. That's when the next strange thing happened. We were standing at the edge of the clearing when Agatha almost face-planted into the ground. She stumbled hard, catching herself at the last second. That in itself wasn't dramatic, except this is someone who spends a lot of time hiking, camping, and walking at night. She doesn't just randomly trip on flat ground. About a minute later, I did the same thing. I was walking from the edge of the clearing back toward the tarp and blanket we had laid out when my foot seemed to land where the ground wasn't. I nearly fell backward. It felt like the earth wasn't where it was supposed to be for a split second, like the terrain shifted an inch under my feet. We both laughed it off, but then kept tripping. Not once or twice, but several times each, stumbling over nothing, bumping into our own feet, misjudging steps on relatively flat, familiar ground. It felt like our sense of balance was off, or like the layout of the clearing was shifted in a subtle way we couldn't see but could feel. Rationally, I could tell myself that everyone has off days. Maybe we were tired. Maybe the cold and the dark were affecting our depth perception. I had never been to this spot before, but Agatha had, and she was usually sure-footed. I visit new places often and don't usually stumble around like that, unless I'm in rough terrain, on loose rocks, or crossing creeks. Something felt strange, but we kept brushing it aside. Eventually, Agatha began setting up her telescope, and I spread the tarp and draped a crocheted blanket over myself. I lay down on the ground, looking up at the sky as she worked. She got the telescope assembled and pointed it roughly where Jupiter should be. She spent maybe 3 minutes getting everything ready, then tried to lock onto the planet. Every time she found Jupiter in the telescope, she would stand up for a few seconds to stretch her back and neck, then bend down to look again, only to find Jupiter gone from the eyepiece. This happened over and over for about 30 minutes. She'd get it perfectly lined up, straighten for a moment, and then somehow lose it. While she worked, I lay there on the tarp, feeling oddly comfortable, more comfortable than I should have felt in the cold. When she finally asked me to come look through the telescope to see if I could help track Jupiter, I stood up and immediately felt a change. It was much colder standing up than it had been lying down. Not just a little colder, like a noticeable shift of what felt like 15 or 20 degrees. The air around my body felt still, not windy. But the temperature difference between ground level and higher up was unmistakable. It was as if the air hugging the ground was warm and the air above was cold. I went over to the telescope and tried to lock onto Jupiter myself, but I had the same problem she did. I could get it centered for a second or two, but then it would slip out of view again. After about 5 more minutes, we gave up and both lay down on the tarp, staring up at the sky instead. The night was perfectly clear. The stars were sharp and bright. I realized Agatha didn't have a blanket, so I asked if she wanted to share mine. She said no, that she wasn't cold. That caught my attention. She is one of those people who is always cold. She wears layers when everyone else is in a t-shirt. For her to decline a blanket in near freezing temperatures was very unlike her. I mentioned the temperature change I had noticed between lying on the ground and standing up. I told her it felt warmer closer to the earth. I wish I had thought to reach my hand under the tarp and touch the ground to compare. But at the time, none of this registered as urgent. It all just felt strange. Not alarming enough to run, but strange enough to linger in the back of my mind. As I kept staring upward, something else caught my eye. The sky looked split in two. The divide ran roughly east to west, like an invisible line cutting across the sky. The half above us on the northern side looked slightly lighter, as if affected by some kind of faint light pollution, while the southern side was darker and more crisp. It wasn't gradual or fuzzy. It was a sharp difference, like someone had turned one half of the night up a notch. Then it got even weirder. As I watched the stars, I noticed that the ones on each side of this invisible line seemed to twinkle at different speeds. The effect was subtle but obvious once I saw it. My brain couldn't quite understand what it was looking at. Just as I started to focus on the stars, the split seemed to reverse. Suddenly, the southern sky looked lighter and the northern darker. I pointed this out to Agatha. She watched for a while and confirmed that she saw it too. We tried to come up with rational ideas, maybe some strange kind of light pollution from a distant town, some atmospheric effect, something to do with elevation or thin clouds we couldn't see. But the line was too sharp. It wasn't a glow or a dome, and the sun had set long before. It didn't look like normal twilight or any fading sunset effect. We weren't sure what to make of it, so we did what we had been doing all night. We noted it, called it weird, and then let it go. Another 10 minutes passed. I felt incredibly relaxed, almost unnaturally so. The combination of the warm feeling near the ground, the blanket, and the quiet made my body heavier. I drifted toward sleep. My thoughts blurred, slipping into that strange space between waking and dreaming. I don't know how much time passed, but at some point, Agatha suddenly sat up and shook my arm. Her voice was urgent but low. She said she saw a light through the trees in the direction of the tent we had seen earlier, the Picasso tent, as I had started calling it in my head. I stayed lying down and turned my head toward the southwest, toward the tree line. I could see a faint, distant light through the trees. "Probably just someone with a flashlight," I said. "Maybe the person staying in that tent, going to the bathroom or coming back from a short hike." Agatha agreed, though she added that the light seemed too high off the ground to be a normal handheld flashlight. We both watched for a moment, then she lay back down, and I let my eyes close again for a bit. At some point, maybe 10, maybe 20 minutes later, I suddenly sat straight up. Nothing obvious had woken me. There was no loud sound, no branch snapping, no animal cry. I just snapped awake like something inside me had been tapped. Agatha seemed to be dozing, still lying down. I looked toward the southwest tree line again and saw a light. At first I assumed it was the same one, so for a brief second I almost felt proud of myself for having such sharp senses, picking up on such a distant movement. Then I realized this wasn't what I thought it was. I saw one light, then another, then another. There were 3 lights in total, and they weren't behaving like normal flashlights. I didn't see beams of light extending toward the ground. Instead, I saw what looked like orbs. Each one glowed softly, a cold bluish color like cheap LED lights. They floated through the upper half of the tree canopy, not down near the ground. They moved in a triangular formation. As they drifted, they rotated around one another, staying in the same general triangle shape, but spinning in slow, deliberate patterns. I couldn't immediately tell how big they were. The tree line was about 50 feet from where we were sitting, but the lights seemed to be deeper in the forest rather than right at the edge, which made it hard to judge distance and size. All I knew for sure was that they were moving closer. They were getting slightly larger as I stared at them. I shook Agatha and pointed. She turned, saw them, and shot up to her feet. She didn't ask questions. She didn't say anything. She grabbed her telescope and started hauling it toward the truck. I stood up and scooped up the tarp and blanket. We didn't fold or pack anything properly. We just threw it all into the bed of the truck in a messy pile. The urgency was sudden and overwhelming. I have never felt dread like I felt in that moment. It wasn't just fear, it was a deep, primal get-out-now feeling that swept over both of us at the same time. My hands went numb. My breathing turned fast and shallow. All I could think was that I needed to be farther away from those lights. And I needed to be away from that mountain. We climbed into the truck, and Agatha floored it. Dirt and gravel flew behind us as we tore out of the clearing and back onto the forest road. The entire time, I felt like I was trying to run, even while sitting down. My body wanted to sprint. It was such a strong fight-or-flight response that I could barely think straight. We didn't talk at all until we were completely out of the forest and back on Highway 26. Only when we saw another car passing in the opposite direction did we both exhale at the same time. The sight of another human being, another vehicle, felt like an anchor to the normal world. Then the "what the hell was that?" comments started. We went over every detail: the tent, the strange, clumsy stumbling, the warm ground, the split sky, the lights moving through the trees. None of it made sense, especially together. To this day, I don't have answers. Each thing on its own could possibly be explained. People dump tents. People assemble them badly. Temperature inversions can happen. Optical illusions can play tricks on your vision. The sky can do strange things that meteorologists can explain. But when I think about how everything lined up, the warped tent, the feeling that the ground was off, the weird behavior of the stars, the strange warmth near the earth, the orbs moving in formation, and that shared, overwhelming sense of dread, I can't shake the feeling that it was all connected somehow. Maybe my brain is just doing what brains do, trying to create patterns, trying to find meaning in random events. Maybe there was nothing truly unusual happening at all. Or maybe there was something out there with us on the mountain that night. If there's a rational explanation, I'd love to hear it. Until then, the easiest thing to say is, maybe it was aliens. Sorry to interrupt. If you're new here, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to Shadow Archives for daily true horror content that will haunt your dreams and keep you wondering what lurks in the shadows. And don't forget to tap the notification bell so you never miss a new story when the darkness calls out to you. It all happened around August of 2013, out in the desert of northern New Mexico, on one of those warm, completely still nights when the mesas stand like dark giants under the stars. The sky felt huge, the air was dry and quiet, and you could see every constellation like someone had scrubbed the sky clean. A friend of mine, John, was throwing one last big party before heading back to university. He lived on this large property with his parents, and they were gone on vacation for a few weeks, leaving him in charge. The place was massive. Acres of farmland, the San Juan River running through it, and a huge mesa rising up to the south like a wall. It was the kind of property that felt isolated from the rest of the world. You could yell at the top of your lungs and no one outside that land would hear you. So, with no parents around, John did what any 20-something with a ranch and no supervision would do. He planned a party that people would still talk about years later. He wanted it to be the kind of night nobody would forget. He dragged out animal troughs and filled them with jungle juice he called dank drank. It was a nasty mix of cheap alcohol and whatever juice was on sale, but it did the job. He set up multiple DJ stations around the property, one closer to the house, another near the fields, and one by the river. He even got one of his buddies to work the cattle guard gate, basically as a bouncer, to make sure only people he knew or trusted could come in. I went to the party with my close friends, Jacob and Sean. If you've heard any of my other stories, you might recognize those names. Later that night, we linked up with Alex, who was Sean's cousin, and Gabe, who everybody called Tank. The nickname fit. Tank was 6'4" and easily 280 pounds or more, all muscle. That detail matters later because seeing anything that makes Tank look small is not normal. By the time the sun started going down, the place looked less like a house party and more like a small festival. Cars were parked all across the fields in uneven rows. Music from different DJs overlapped and bounced off the canyon walls. You could smell dust, beer, weed, and that sweet, sticky smell of spilled alcohol soaking into dry ground. People were laughing, dancing, yelling across the field, hugging and talking to total strangers. The sky faded from gold to deep blue, and soon the stars looked like glitter, scattered over everything. We started drinking and moving through the crowd, stopping here and there to talk to people we knew and people we didn't. Everywhere you looked, there was something going on. Someone doing tricks with a lighter. Someone climbing into the back of a pickup truck with a speaker system. People stumbling, people flirting, people shouting over the music. It had that feeling of a perfect night, one of those times you never expect to end badly. But Jacob couldn't relax. He had this nervous energy that wouldn't go away. He kept scanning the edges of the property and saying things like, "Dude, the cops are going to show up. There's no way they don't." We kept trying to calm him down, reminding him this was private land and that the police couldn't just walk in without a reason. We thought John had it all under control with the gate guard and the distance from neighbors. Turns out Jacob's paranoia wasn't completely off base. The guy at the cattle guard, John's friend who was supposed to keep watch and filter who came in, got drunk. Not just tipsy, but full-on passed out drunk. He left the gate open. With the jungle juice, the music, the fires, and the floodlights, By 10 o'clock, you could probably see the party from miles away. The glow lit up the low sky. If anyone was driving on nearby roads, they'd notice it for sure. We noticed headlights coming down the long, winding dirt road that led to the property. At first, we thought it was just more guests arriving. But as the lights got closer, they switched from normal beams to flashing red and blue. Sheriffs, state police, more than one vehicle. The reaction from the crowd was instant. Panic spread like a fuse catching fire. Some people started screaming. Others ran straight to their cars. Engines roared to life. Tires spun in the dirt, and dust clouds rose into the beam of floodlights. Dogs were barking, officers shouting. Someone cut the music, but another DJ kept playing for a bit because they didn't realize what was happening. People scattered in every direction like a flock of birds. We didn't wait to see what would happen next. We took off toward the river, along with a group of others. Between the party and the river, there was a barbed wire fence. Tank, being the biggest, tried to push it down so everyone could jump over. He slammed his weight onto the wire, and I came right after him, trying to follow. When I stepped onto it, the wire slipped and snapped back up. It caught my pants and tore them straight open. I felt the fabric rip from the thigh area down and realized I was basically in my boxers. I didn't have time to care. I just kept running. The desert sand and brush stung my legs, but at least it was warm out. If it had been winter, I'd have been in serious trouble. We ran until we found a dense patch of cottonwood trees and brush near the riverbank. The foliage was so thick it felt like stepping into a natural cave. Branches overlapped overhead and around us, creating a kind of shelter. We crouched down low, trying to steady our breathing and listen. After a minute, 2 other people burst into the same spot, crashing through branches and scaring the hell out of us. They were panicked and speaking mostly Spanish. We managed to get them to quiet down, whispering, "Calate los cops," just trying to keep everyone silent. In the distance, we heard officers shouting, their voices echoing over the water and through the trees. "Come out! We know you're out there!" they yelled. "If you're under 18, we'll call your parents. If you're over 18, it's going to be worse if you don't come out now." You could hear their boots crunching on twigs and gravel, the crackle of radios and the deep bark of police dogs. Flashlights swept across the trees, beams cutting through the branches above our heads. At times they came so close we could see the dust and bugs spinning through the light. My heart was pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. My chest burned from running and holding my breath. I kept thinking, if they shine that light just a little lower, they're going to see us. If the dog comes this way, it's over. Then, underneath all that noise, radios, dogs, officers yelling, we heard something else. Behind us, out in the river, came the sound of splashing. At first, it was faint, just small sloshes like someone wading through shallow water. I barely noticed it. I thought maybe someone else was trying to cross the river to hide on the opposite bank. But the sound got louder. The splashes grew heavier, like something big was moving through the water. Tank whispered, "Bro, something's back there." I tried to brush it off. "Probably a cow or something, dude. Just be quiet," I whispered back. But even as I said it, I could hear the breathing, slow, heavy, panting. Not human, not like someone out of breath from running. It sounded like some huge animal drawing in air and letting it out in long, deep waves. We were in an area where mountain lions weren't uncommon, especially at night. I thought maybe it was one of those. A big cat wouldn't splash that much, though. It would move quietly. Whatever this was sounded massive and clumsy in the river. Sean's voice shook as he whispered, "I'm not staying here to get eaten. I don't care if I get arrested." Just then, from up on the mesa behind us, we heard a voice yell out, clear and loud, "It's all clear over here. You don't need to search this area." The officers nearby paused. Their flashlights turned toward the mesa, toward a small cliff edge that overlooked some of the property. One of the sheriffs shouted back, "Copy that." He didn't sound fully convinced, but apparently it was enough. A moment later, their lights swung away, and the group of officers moved off in another direction. We stared at each other in disbelief. We knew that voice. It was Ryan, an acquaintance who had climbed partway up the mesa earlier to hide, or maybe just to get a better view. Somehow, in a drunken but clever moment, he had mimicked the tone of an officer and tricked them into leaving our area alone. Without even fully understanding what was going on down below, he'd basically saved us. But our relief didn't last. As soon as the cops moved away, the panting behind us in the river got louder. The splashing grew heavier, like whatever it was had reached the near bank. Branches snapped. Water slapped against something big. It sounded like it was pushing its way toward the tree line, toward us. That was enough for Sean. "For this," he blurted out, no longer whispering, "I'm not dying out here. You can if you want. I'm going up there with Ryan." We didn't argue. The choice was risk an arrest or stay near the river with something that sounded too big to be normal. We broke from our hiding spot and ran uphill toward the mesa. The climb was steep and rough. Rocks shifted under our shoes. Cactus needles caught our clothes, and our hands tore open as we grabbed at anything that could help us pull ourselves up. We were breathing hard, adrenaline pushing us faster. When we finally reached the top, we could see the whole scene below. John's property was lit up with red and blue flashes, mixed with the leftover glow of bonfires and party lights. We saw people being lined up, others being questioned, and some still sprinting into the darkness away from the cruisers. It looked like something out of a movie. We took a few minutes to catch our breath, relieved that we'd escaped both the cops and whatever had been moving down by the river. We found Ryan and a couple of others he'd ended up with. We gave him a quick, "Dude, you saved our asses," and laughed nervously. Then it happened. Out of nowhere, something huge moved across the mesa in front of us. It was about 15 yards away, maybe less, cutting across our field of vision from left to right. It was only there for a second or two, but that was enough. The speed of the thing was unbelievable, like it had covered that distance in barely any time at all. The shape, whatever it was, looked like a massive, solid shadow. The only light came from the faint moonlight and the glow from the party below, but we could still see its outline. It had huge shoulders, long arms, and ran upright on two legs. The body looked thick and heavy, like a linebacker or a pro wrestler, but it moved with unnatural speed and strength. Tank was huge, but next to this thing, he'd have looked small, and realizing that made my body go cold. You don't often get the sensation of seeing something that makes your brain go, "This is wrong, this doesn't fit." We all froze, too shocked to say anything. We listened, but there was almost no sound. Just a few fading footstep thumps that slowly melted into the open desert soundscape beyond the mesa. Down below us, the party had quieted into scattered voices and low murmurs, like the night itself was starting to calm down. Up where we were, though, everything felt tense, heavy, like the air was pressing in around us. Ryan let out a nervous laugh. "I think that was Bigfoot," he said, half joking, half serious. No one responded. It didn't feel funny. The desert felt like it was holding its breath. None of us wanted to stay up there long enough to see if the thing came back. We decided to climb down the other side of the mesa, away from the property, away from the river, away from whatever that shadow had been. The descent was even more dangerous than the climb. Loose dirt slid under our shoes, rocks rolled under our feet. We grabbed at bushes and branches to keep from falling. Our legs were shaky and our minds were racing. By the time we reached the bottom, I was covered in dust. My hands stung, my pants were basically gone, and my muscles trembled from exhaustion and adrenaline. At the base of the mesa, we regrouped with Ryan and the two strangers who'd been hiding nearby. We said our quick goodbyes to them, Everyone wanted to split up and find their own way out. We still had a problem, though. My truck was parked up at John's house on the main part of the property, and that whole area to the east and northeast was crawling with cops. Our only option was to swing around, skirt the edges of the land, and try to come in from the west, where there was less activity. That meant heading north first, climbing another steep area covered in cottonwoods, sagebrush, and other low desert vegetation. It was like a small pocket forest tucked into the dry land. We started up the hill slowly, trying to be quiet. The night felt very still. Besides our footsteps crunching on dry dirt and loose stones, there was no other sound. No wind in the branches, no insects buzzing, nothing. Then we heard it. Laughter. High-pitched, soft, childlike. It sounded like a group of young girls giggling just ahead of us, near the top of the hill. The sound wasn't loud, but it was clear enough to be unmistakable. It didn't fit. There were no kids at this party, and no houses close enough for the sound to drift in from somewhere else. We stopped in our tracks. The hairs on the back of my neck stood straight up. My skin prickled with that instinctive raw fear you get when something is deeply out of place. Sean shouted up the hill, his voice shaking with anger and fear. "Who's up there? Come out! We just saw something! Don't fuck with us, we're already scared!" Silence followed. We waited, trying to listen for movement, but there was nothing. For a few seconds, it felt like time stretched out forever. Then the laughter came again. This time, it was softer. But it felt closer. It didn't sound like it was coming from just one spot now. It sounded like it was moving or circling us just beyond what we could see. High-pitched giggles like 2 or 3 girls whispering jokes to each other in the dark. Sean yelled again, "Stop it! Just let us come up and we'll leave you alone." No answer. We pulled out our phones and turned on the flashlights, shining them up the hill and into the bushes. All we saw were tangled branches, sagebrush, and dark tree trunks. No figures, no one standing there. The giggles started one last time, faint, overlapping right at the fringes of the light. I can't swear to it, but I thought I saw 2 crouched shapes near the top of the hill, just behind some bushes. Maybe it was my imagination, maybe it was shadows playing tricks, but in that moment, I believed my eyes. That was enough. None of us said another word. We turned and retreated, taking a longer, wider route north to avoid the hill, and circling around until we were far from the river, far from the mesa, far from the laughter and the thing in the desert. Later that night, after we eventually found our way back toward the roads and heard the quiet hum of normal traffic again, we got word that another party had started about 15 miles away. People from John's place had regrouped, moved, and kept the night going. We were shaken but exhausted, and in a strange way, we wanted to feel normal again. So we went. We drank a little more, we laughed. We tried to forget the fear, but somewhere between the cops arriving at the first party and us making it to the second, tragedy hit. We heard that Larry, one of John's closest friends, had crashed his car leaving the first party. His vehicle had rolled several times. He didn't survive. I didn't know Larry personally, but everyone who did said he was kind, generous, always looking out for his friends. The kind of person who'd give you his last dollar or his favorite shirt if you needed it. Losing someone like that so young over one bad choice hits hard. It leaves a mark that doesn't go away. That night stays with me, not just because of whatever we saw or think we saw, but because of everything it reminded me about life. Parties can be fun. Nights like that can feel unforgettable, like you're invincible, like nothing bad can happen. But reality doesn't care how good the music is or how many friends you have around you. Cops show up, people crash cars, strange things move in the dark. Sometimes I still think about all the what-ifs. What if John's friend hadn't passed out and left the gate open? What if Ryan had been up on that mesa alone when that shadow thing ran by? What if we hadn't run from the riverbank and whatever was in that water had come closer? The questions don't really have answers, but they linger. The older I get, the more I realize how thin the line is between a fun story and a nightmare. Every time I'm back out in that part of New Mexico near those mesas, I get a familiar chill if I'm there after dark. The land feels quiet but watchful, like it remembers everything that's happened on it. I still don't know exactly what we saw that night. A huge person in the dark, some animal we misread, something else entirely, and those giggles on the hill, another group messing with us, or something stranger. I guess I'll never really know. What I do know is this: life can turn on you in a second. One open gate, one drunk driver, one decision to run left instead of right. It's all fragile, it's all unpredictable, and somehow that's both terrifying and weirdly beautiful. If you made it through this whole story, thanks for listening. Much love to everyone who supported me and listened to the other encounters I've shared. I've got more of them stored away in my memory, and maybe one day I'll actually start that podcast or hop on someone's live show and talk about this stuff in real time. Until then, stay safe, stay aware, take care of each other, and above all, be kind. I've been living on the same piece of land my entire life, and I've seen a lot of strange things out here, but nothing prepared me for what happened recently. It's the kind of experience that keeps replaying in the back of your mind at the most random times, making you wonder if you truly understood what you saw, or if there are still things out here that we simply don't have names for. To give some context, my family owns 467 acres tucked deep into a hollow in northeastern Alabama. The land has been in my family since the early 80s, and my grandparents still live just down the road. It's quiet here in a way most people don't understand unless they've lived in the mountains. The world feels smaller within a hollow, the sky blocked by tall ridgelines, the air cooler, the shadows longer. Our nearest real neighbors are the deer, coyotes, foxes, and the occasional wandering black bear. Lately, though, things have been changing around us. Someone recently bought one of the mountains on the edge of our hollow and turned it into an ATV park. That park brought constant noise, engines, yelling, lights, and it pushed all kinds of wildlife down onto our side of the land. More deer than usual, more coyotes, animals darting through the trees at all hours. It's like the mountain lost its peace and everything living up there decided to flee all at once. Ever since that happened, the woods have felt different. Loud in some ways, but too quiet in others. On the night of November 1st, my siblings decided to take the Polaris Ranger out for a ride. It was close to 10:30 p.m., late enough that most of the world around us had settled into silence. They do these late rides all the time, looping around the property, cutting through the trails we all know by heart. They weren't doing anything unusual, nothing out of routine. It was just another quiet ride in the dark, the way they've done since they were kids. There's a small bridge over the creek near the start of the property road. We've always thought of it as the sign that you're close to home. When you see that bridge, you know you're safe. You're back on our land, and you're almost at the house. They crossed it like usual and started their normal loop. Music playing through the small speakers of the Ranger, the wind pushing through the open sides of the vehicle, and the cold starting to creep in from the late fall night. Around 10:45 p.m. or so, something changed. The oldest sibling told me later that she felt a shift in the air, a sinking feeling deep in her stomach, like something heavy had just settled over the forest. She didn't say anything to the younger two because she didn't want to scare them. Instead, she just kept driving, turning the Ranger through the usual path, circling the land the way they always did. But the feeling didn't go away. It got stronger. She said it felt like the woods were holding their breath, like even the wind had decided to stop moving. She hated the silence so much, she turned the music up, trying to force some kind of normal into the night. But the sound only seemed to make things worse. It echoed across the empty fields instead of blending into them. A few minutes later, they noticed something lying on the ground in one of the open areas near the woods. It was dark, and they couldn't make out what it was. The youngest asked if they should stop, but the oldest shook her head and said, "Don't stop. We'll look at it in the morning." She didn't explain why, but later she told me she had this overwhelming certainty that if they stopped, something terrible would happen. She didn't know what. She just knew they needed to keep moving. They continued making the loop around the property, and by the time it was around 11:15, they stopped only because our mother had texted them. They paused just long enough to check the message, and while the ranger idled, the middle sibling glanced out across a field that sits lower than the rest of the land. There, standing in the open, far across the field, was something he couldn't understand. He described it as a large creature, maybe 6 feet tall with 4 legs, but standing the way a human stands. It wasn't shaped like a deer or a coyote or anything they'd ever seen. It was tall, strange, and wrong in a way that made his instincts scream. He said he locked eyes with it across the field. Even through the dark, even through the distance, he felt like it saw him clearly, and in that instant, he floored the gas pedal. He didn't explain why he took off so fast. He didn't tell the others what he saw. He just knew they needed to go. As the ranger sped toward the main road back home, the youngest sibling began crying. Not just scared crying, full panic, shaking, begging them to go home. She later said that it felt like they were being watched from every angle, like something was right behind them, keeping pace, waiting for them to slow down. They reached the gate at the entrance to the property, and the oldest jumped out to open it. She told me later that in that moment she had a horrible thought, that if she looked up, if she lifted her head even an inch, whatever was out there would be staring her in the face, and if she met its eyes, she wouldn't survive. She didn't know where that thought came from, but it hit her hard enough that she kept her head down the entire time. They sped home as fast as the ranger could go. When they arrived, all 3 of them looked shaken in a way I hadn't seen before. Their pupils were blown wide, so black and dilated that you could barely see the color in their eyes. They looked like they'd just run from something life-threatening, like prey animals that barely escaped. Now, here's where it gets even stranger. We have a porch dog who follows them every single time they go on rides. He's loyal, protective, and acts like their shadow. That night, he refused to leave the house. He stayed curled up by the door and wouldn't go with them no matter how much they called him. He growled at the dark once, then stayed put. That dog has never acted like that. The cattle on our property, usually easy to spot, even at night because they gather near certain areas, were missing. The siblings didn't see a single cow anywhere on the land, which is extremely unusual. No deer, no coyotes, no movement, just empty fields and an unsettling smell of smoke drifting through the air. They said the entire hollow felt dead. No crickets, no owls, no frogs, nothing but the wind and their own breathing. While they were riding, just before everything happened, the song Pumped Up Kicks started playing. A song that has whistling in it. They said that whistling echoed weirdly across the field, almost blending into the night in a way they'd never heard before, like it was bouncing back at them. When they were coming home, all 3 of them felt this overwhelming sense of being hunted. Not followed, hunted, like something was matching their speed, like something was waiting for them to stop. They told me later that if they'd slowed down, even for a second, they believed with absolute certainty that they wouldn't have made it home. Since that night, we've gone back to the area. We walked the field, checked the spot where they saw the creature, checked the ground where they'd spotted the unknown object earlier. Everything looked normal. No tracks, no damage, no sign of struggle, no broken branches, no prints in the mud by the creek. nothing out of place at all. But you can't tell three people that what they saw wasn't real when they all felt the exact same thing at the exact same time. Fear like that doesn't come from nothing. Animals don't disappear from hundreds of acres for no reason. Dogs don't refuse midnight rides they've taken 100 times. And shadows don't grow 6 feet tall and stand upright on 4 legs. Something was out there that night, something that didn't want to be seen. And whatever it was, it watched my siblings long enough to make them feel like they were prey on their own land. I don't know what it was. Maybe I don't want to know. All I know is that on November 1st, something moved through our hollow that wasn't supposed to be there, and nothing has felt the same since. It was the summer of 2012. One of those warm northern New Mexico summers where the days stretched on forever and the nights felt alive with heat, dust, and the hum of faraway traffic. I was 17 then, stuck in that strange age where you're old enough to be restless but not old enough to go anywhere real. Most kids my age spent their summers either working, partying, or doing something they shouldn't. I was no different. It was just part of growing up out there, in a place where boredom mixed with curiosity could get you into all kinds of situations. That night, my best friend Sean and I decided to drive out to the Connie Mack World Series in Farmington. It's a big summer event. Semi-pro youth baseball players from all over the country come to compete, and the whole town turns into this buzzing, loud, electric place. We didn't really care about the baseball. We went for the crowd, the lights, the music blasting from cars, and if I'm being honest, the chance of talking to girls. It was just a thing teenagers did, and that year it felt like the only real excitement in our lives. The night was good. At the stadium, people were everywhere, laughing, yelling, meeting up with friends they hadn't seen in months. The kind of atmosphere where time slips away from you and you don't realize how late it's gotten until the lights above the field start to dim. We stuck around for a while, then grabbed some food and eventually headed back toward home, still riding the high of the night, the music and the energy around us. We could have taken the regular route, the same road everyone else took going home, but I wasn't in the mood for the usual way. I've always had this tendency to wander, to take long, empty back roads just for the quiet. So instead, I turned onto Old Crouch Mesa Highway, a lonely stretch of road I knew too well. It cuts through empty basins, low hills, and big open spaces where you can see the silhouettes of the La Plata and San Juan Mountains far to the north. But at night, it becomes a different world. It's isolated, pitch black except for the moon. And the only sound you hear is the radio or your own breathing. My mom used to work out there for an oil field company that reclaimed contaminated soil. She was in and out of that area all the time, and because of that, I'd been down that highway more times than I could count. Day, night, rain, snow, it didn't matter. I knew it like the back of my hand. But no matter how familiar it was, it always made me uneasy. There was something heavy about that place, like the land itself carried old memories that no one talked about. Sean was unusually quiet on the drive. Normally he would mess with me, joking around, yelling things like, "Watch out," just to make me slam the brakes and panic. I'd learned long ago to ignore his fake warnings because they nearly caused more than one accident. But this time he didn't say much. He seemed tired, calm, almost zoned out. And for a while, things were peaceful. Just the hum of the engine and the glow of the headlights cutting through the darkness ahead. Eventually, we turned toward one of those intersections you never see another car at. It was a 4-way stop, half paved and half dirt, stretching into nothingness. On a normal day, I would have blown right through it. But a few months earlier, a cop had pulled me over for rolling through that same stop while my mom sat right beside me. I wasn't eager to relive that embarrassment, so I eased the car to a complete stop, and waited for a moment. That's when Sean suddenly yelled, "Hey, what's that?" At first, I ignored him. I thought he was messing with me again, trying to get a reaction. I turned, ready to snap at him, but when I looked back toward the road, my voice caught in my throat. There, about 20 or 30 yards ahead, something crossed the road. It wasn't a person, and it wasn't a deer. It moved too slowly, too deliberately, and it had a shape that was terribly wrong. It was tall, taller than any human we knew. Broad in the shoulders, wide through the chest, and muscular in a way that made no sense. The figure looked like it belonged on a football field, not in the middle of an empty desert road at midnight. For a few seconds, I just stared, completely frozen. My mind couldn't make sense of what it was seeing. The figure moved left to right, cutting across the road like something with a purpose. It wasn't stumbling, it wasn't running. It was walking, calm and steady. The moonlight caught its outline just enough for us to see how massive it was. Sean broke the silence by screaming, "Go, go, go!" I slammed my foot down so hard on the gas that the tires screeched. The car lurched forward, dust blowing behind us as we shot down the road. My heart was hammering against my ribs so fast I could barely breathe. I didn't know if that thing had seen us or even cared, but everything inside me wanted distance between us and it. A few moments later, Sean yelled again, "Stop! Idle it! Slow down!" I hit the brakes. Not as hard as before, but enough that the car crawled to a slow, rolling pace. Both of us stared through the windshield, the headlights stretching into the darkness like weak beams against the night. Then we saw it again. Off to the right side, about 30 or 40 yards away, the same hulking figure stood facing away from us. It was half lit by the moon, its shoulders rising and falling as if it was breathing deeply. It was walking farther into the dark, away from the road, disappearing slowly into the void of desert. The best way I can describe it is this. Imagine Arnold Schwarzenegger in his prime, but taller, maybe 7 feet tall, with shoulders so massive they looked unreal. Long arms, thick legs, and a body that looked too solid, too heavy to belong to anything normal. I never saw its face. And to this day, I'm grateful for that. After it vanished completely, we sat there quietly, barely speaking. I could feel my hands shaking on the wheel. My throat felt dry. Sean didn't say a word for the rest of the drive. We just both knew something unnatural had crossed our path. When I finally dropped him off at his house, I panicked at the thought of going home alone. My mom was out of town with her boyfriend, so I begged Sean to come stay with me. His mom refused. She wasn't in the mood to let him out again. So I was forced to drive home alone, back through the dark roads, replaying everything in my mind. By the time I reached my house, I was shaking so badly I could barely unlock the door. I shut every single lock twice and sat on my bed, wide awake, staring out the window. I kept imagining that figure standing outside in the yard, or walking past the window, or waiting by the door. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was a horse, but it wasn't shaped like a horse. It wasn't shaped like any animal I knew. It walked on 2 legs. It moved like a person, but looked like something far bigger and far stronger. I was so scared that night I actually called my mom and begged her to come home, because I just saw Bigfoot. She didn't believe me, of course, but hearing her voice helped me get through the night. That encounter was the moment I started believing there were things out there that weren't human, and it wouldn't be the last time I saw something I couldn't explain. A couple of years later, in northeastern New Mexico, I was at a party on hundreds of acres of farmland owned by a friend. Sean was there too, along with 4 others. All of us saw something huge in the darkness that night, just like the creature on Crouch Mesa. Later that same night, we heard little girls laughing from somewhere out in the fields. High-pitched, playful, completely out of place in that empty farmland. None of us slept afterward, And then there was another encounter years later in the mountains of Washington, while I was in the Air Force attending survival, evasion, resistance, and escape training. Deep in those forests, among the towering pines and fog-covered ridges, I felt the same thing watching me. The same pressure in the air. The same feeling of being observed by something ancient and strong. But none of those moments were as life-changing as that night in 2012, on that empty stretch of old Crouch Mesa Highway. That was where it all started. A quiet summer night that turned into the first time I realized the world is much stranger and much darker than I ever imagined. I honestly don't know if this is the right place to share something like this, but I haven't been able to stop thinking about what happened during my camping trip in August. It's been sitting in the back of my mind for months, refusing to leave me alone. I've tried brushing it off, I've tried convincing myself it was nothing, but the truth is I can still hear that sound in my head if I think about it long enough. I can still feel that same cold, heavy fear I felt in the dark, sitting inside my tent with my heart pounding so hard I thought it might wake my friends. So here's what happened. My boyfriend, 2 close friends, and I decided to take a small Vermont road trip and camp our way through different state parks. On the first night, we stayed at Jamaica State Park. That place is important to me because I used to go there as a kid with my family. I remember it being peaceful, full of river noise, bird calls, rustling leaves, and the usual sounds you hear deep in the woods. It always felt comfortable and familiar in a nostalgic way. That evening started normally enough. We set up camp, unpacked the tents, gathered wood, and got the fire going. The air had that cool, late summer feel, warm enough to be outside in a hoodie, but cold enough to make the fire feel inviting. We sat around talking, snacking, sipping drinks, and settling into that easy rhythm you get on camping trips. But the first strange thing we noticed wasn't something we saw, it was something we didn't hear. The woods were silent, completely unnaturally silent. No crickets, no cicadas, no birds settling in the branches, no owls. No distant rustling, nothing. It was the kind of silence that doesn't feel calm. It feels wrong. The kind that presses into your ears and makes you suddenly aware of how loud your own breathing is. We mentioned it to each other, joked about how eerie it felt, but none of us were truly concerned. Sometimes nature has off nights. Sometimes animals quiet down. Sometimes storms change behavior. We didn't think much of it. When I finally crawled into my sleeping bag later that night, I noticed again how silent everything was. Even lying there, half tired and sinking into sleep, the silence felt like a weight over the campground. I tried to ignore it and eventually drifted off. I don't know how long I slept before waking up, but when I did, I came out of sleep instantly, not groggy, not confused, just suddenly wide awake. At first, I didn't know why. Then I heard it, a loud banging sound somewhere outside the tent. The campground is a loop with a paved road circling all the sites. The sound came from right along that loop, close enough that I could almost imagine the vibration through the ground. It didn't sound like footsteps. It didn't sound like someone walking. It didn't sound like an animal tripping over something. When other campers walked to the bathrooms earlier, I could hear the gravel crunch under their shoes. I could hear the rhythm of footsteps. But this sound didn't match anything I recognized. It was a single, solid clang. Loud, deep, metallic. Almost like someone taking a heavy pan or piece of metal and striking it against something else. And it wasn't random. It was steady, measured. A bang every 5 seconds. Like a slow metronome echoing through the trees. Bang, bang, bang. And it wasn't just once or twice. The sound made its way around the entire campground loop. I followed it through the fabric of the tent as it moved, circling the area. I tried to tell myself it had to be a person, maybe someone drunk, maybe a maintenance worker, maybe a ranger dealing with something strange in the night. I tried to think of every normal explanation I could come up with, but none of them fit. There were no footsteps between the bangs, no breathing, no rustling, no wheels, nothing. Just that metallic clanging sound moving in a perfect pattern, circling the entire campground. It went around once, then twice. It lasted maybe 20 minutes. It didn't speed up, slow down, pause, or act like any living thing. It just continued, steady and cold, like it wasn't even trying to hide itself. I have camped plenty of times before. I've done backpacking trips in deep woods. I've slept in remote spots all over. I've woken up to bears sniffing around the fire grate. I've heard coyotes, foxes, deer, raccoons, porcupines, owls, all kinds of wildlife. I know what normal sounds like out there. But this wasn't normal. And for the first time in my life, I felt a fear so strong it froze me in place. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even reach for my flashlight. I just lay there with my eyes wide open in the dark, my heart racing like I was being chased. I told myself over and over to look outside the tent, but my body refused to move. I kept thinking that whatever was making that sound didn't belong there. It didn't belong in those woods, on that road, or anywhere I knew. And I had this horrible feeling that if I unzipped the tent, whatever it was would be standing right there. After what felt like ages, the noise faded. I don't remember falling asleep, but at some point, exhaustion must have taken over. In the morning, when we got up, I immediately asked my friends if they heard anything during the night. Only one of them said yes. He described the exact same thing, the metal, the pacing, the steady rhythm. The two of us laughed it off, trying to pretend it wasn't that weird. We told the others maybe it was a moose, but I wasn't convinced, and neither was he. Later, I talked to a park ranger near the visitors area. I asked if moose ever came through that campground. She practically laughed and told me it was very uncommon to see moose in that exact area. Vermont has moose, sure, but not usually in that part of the state park. I told her about the noise. She didn't seem freaked out, but she also didn't offer an explanation. She said she'd listen that night as she fell asleep and let us know if she heard anything. She seemed calm enough that I felt a little better. The rest of the day went normally as we explored the area, cooked dinner, and sat around another fire. We joked about the banging sound every now and then, but behind the jokes, I could tell we were all a little on edge. That night we went to sleep ready, flashlights beside us, shoes near the door, ready to unzip the tent at the slightest noise. But nothing happened. The woods were back to normal. Crickets returned, leaves rustled, small animals moved around. It felt almost comforting compared to the silence of the first night. In the morning, we packed our things and headed north to the next campground, still making quiet jokes about the moose that didn't exist. There was one more detail from the first morning that stuck with me. The campsite across from us had an ambulance parked at it. Someone staying there apparently had a medical issue. The man camping there was older, probably retired age. I wondered aloud if he might have been confused in the night, maybe wandering, maybe hitting something accidentally, but my friends didn't buy it. They said the ranger would have mentioned that possibility when I asked her, and the sound didn't match footsteps, walking, or human movement. Plus, a confused person wouldn't keep a perfect steady rhythm for 20 minutes, straight around a campsite loop. That explanation didn't settle the unease. Weeks later, on October 23rd, I was scrolling through TikTok when I came across a video talking about the Bennington Triangle. I don't follow paranormal stuff, and I'm not someone who gets pulled into conspiracy theories. I'm a logical thinker, a grounded person. I don't jump to ghosts or spirits as explanations, but I clicked out of curiosity, mostly because I was bored. The video showed a map of the area people consider part of the Bennington Triangle, an area famous for disappearances, strange sounds, and eerie encounters people can't explain. As the boundaries popped up on screen, my stomach dropped. Jamaica State Park sits right next to it. I looked deeper, searching online, reading old stories, Reddit threads, articles, whatever I could find. A surprising number of people reported strange experiences in or near that area. One detail kept coming up. People had heard rhythmic, metallic banging sounds in the woods at night. I felt a wave of dread when I read that. I'm still not sure what I heard. I'm not saying it was supernatural. I'm not saying it wasn't human. I'm not saying it was anything impossible. Maybe someone was messing around. Maybe a ranger was doing something strange. Maybe it was something natural I've never heard before. But here's what I do know. It wasn't footsteps. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a moose. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't normal. And the silence, before and after, was the worst part. Animals know when something is wrong. They go quiet when the woods aren't safe. And that night, the woods were silent for a reason. Even now, months later, when I think about lying there, frozen, listening to that steady metal echo moving through the dark, I get chills. I've never been that scared in the woods. Not while backpacking, not while camping alone, not even around bears. Whatever it was, I hope I never hear it again. My dad grew up in the suburbs of Chicago back in the 1970s. At that time, life felt very different from today. People trusted strangers more, kids had a lot of freedom, and no one really thought twice about things that would seem dangerous now. My dad went to a high school a couple of towns away from where he lived. Because of the distance, students were given money for bus fare every day so they could get to school and back home safely. My grandmother was careful and responsible. Every morning she would give my dad just enough money to take the bus both ways. In her mind, that was the safest option. But my dad was a teenager, and like a lot of teenagers, he thought he knew better. Instead of using the bus, he would put the money in his pocket and hitchhike. To him, it felt faster, easier, and honestly, a little exciting. Hitchhiking was common back then, especially in suburban areas, and people didn't see it as a big risk. Most days, nothing strange happened. He would stick out his thumb, someone would pull over, and he'd get to school or back home without any problems. But one day, everything changed. A man picked him up who seemed friendly and normal at first. He talked casually, acted polite, and didn't give off any immediate warning signs. My dad didn't feel scared. In fact, he felt lucky that someone had stopped so quickly. As they drove, my dad noticed something in the back seat. There was a clown costume lying there. It wasn't being worn, just folded or tossed casually like it was no big deal. At the time, my dad didn't think much of it. Clowns were associated with parties, events, or entertainment, not fear. Still, the image stuck in his mind, even after he got out of the car and went on with his day. Years later, long after my dad was grown, the truth came out. The man who had picked him up was John Wayne Gacy. By then, everyone knew who Gacy was and what he had done. He became one of the most infamous serial killers in American history, known for presenting himself as a friendly, helpful person while hiding something truly horrifying underneath. When my dad realized who that man had been, it shook him deeply. He often thought about how close he had come to something terrible without ever knowing it at the time. One small decision, one different day, and his life could have gone in a completely different direction. It's something he still thinks about, a reminder of how danger doesn't always look dangerous, and how sometimes the scariest moments are the ones you don't realize until much later. If you're still here, it means these stories didn't just pass through you, they stayed. Every story you heard tonight was real. Real people, real moments, and in every one of them, something went wrong, or almost did. If you want to keep exploring the stories that don't let go so easily, subscribe to Shadow Archives, because there are more stories waiting, and not all of them end before it's too late.